Everyone, and welcome to this astrological update. So we have quite an interesting phenomenon happening in this time we're in right now, which is the Algol, a fixed star, which is also known as the Eye of the Medusa, is right now in conjunct to transiting Mars in Taurus. So I want to just give a quick update on what to expect, what this energy might bring, and a little insight to the mythology of Medusa, because that is one of my main passions, to understand and unravel these mythological stories and archetypes, to understand these archetypes living within ourselves and our structures, our way of being. And just in order for you to really understand the framework of astrology, is basically an interpretative art form, and therefore it's also up to each astrologer to hold themselves accountable for the depth of interpretation of, for instance, these planetary positions. And one of the ways to do that is to look at the current transits and look up to, sometimes we have fixed stars with conjunct to some of the major planets. We would have asteroids that you can dive deeper into. And one quite, we could say a fixed star with a darker connection to it would be the Eye of Medusa, because it's often connected to decapitation, darkness, all sorts of like more violent happenings in the world. So now we have it conjunct to Mars, and we can ask ourselves, what is happening? And in order for me to really dive into these things is, first of all, I do not accept the mainstream interpretations of other fixed stars where God, or asteroids in specific, where goddesses or goddess energy or muses are involved, because I feel in this time that we are living in, so much of the feminine has been misunderstood and misinterpreted and suppressed. So it's a time where we need to reinterpret the stories about female archetypes or mythologies through the lens of our current knowledge and understanding of the balance between the feminine and masculine. And I'm saying all of these things because I find it very important to explain to you that this kind of work goes really deep within each of us. Astrology has such an opportunity with astrology to open doors within our consciousness and our understanding on ourselves that would just not otherwise be possible. And in a time where so much sacred knowledge gets lost in AI and, quick dopamine rushes and simplifications, one thing I find very noble to do is to dive into deeper aspects and study them, so that you can train your mind and your body and your spirit to be the expansive humans that we all are. So if you're here and you understand what I'm talking about, and you are somewhat, just attracted to this kind of knowledge, then we are definitely on the same energy frequency. And I know that you would like my reinterpretation of Medusa, because basically, without using too much language that can be disturbing on YouTube, the story of Medusa was that she was a mortal, beautiful woman, famously known for her long, lustrous hair, and she got violated by Poseidon. And instead of having justice, she was the one who was being, what we can call, punished for this, by being turned into what we know, this female archetype with poisonous snakes in her hair, having the gaze that can turn you to stone if you look to it for too long. So I might go deeper into this story at one point, but what we can draw from that is, with this fixed star and the mythology and understanding of what's going on, or possibly can be going on in this transition where Mars is conjunct the Algol, which is the eye of Medusa, could be this feminine fire rising, feminine need for justice, feminine need for speaking up about injustices where, where again it is the victim that is being blamed for the crime. And I think more than ever, we need to bring into balance these feminine and masculine aspects of ourselves, which is, a continuous piece of work where we constantly get new information, new understanding. But if there's something that is so uncanny and is going on throughout this summer, especially now with Mars in Taurus hitting just the eye of Algol, there is this rise of fire, of speaking raw truth, of stopping and asking oneself, why is it that there is this tendency has been this tendency to blame the victims, and very often in mythology those victims has been women who has been violated, and why are those stories even important? And I think it is that having the knowing that we are all here on earth to learn something about ourselves and play our piece of the puzzle of this broader cosmos, this broader universe. And one of the finest things that we can dedicate ourselves to throughout a lifetime is to confront those shadow pieces within ourselves that still holds on to beliefs and ways of being that is limited and is ultimately also very discriminating even to parts within ourselves. And if you are someone who have worked more deeply with yourself, or you have experienced trauma of any kind, which often is the catalyst for people to seek deeper, well, you would maybe often have realized that being in the presence of people who have not experienced the depth of life and maybe even darkness that you have faced, that you would be met with an immense wall in other people who has not experienced that depth, so that you would feel like you suddenly become the mirror of everything they don't want to confront and don't even want to have anything to do with, which can make being, having traumatic experiences can isolate people and make them very like hermit mode, isolated from society in general, because this long story of having to, just exile the victims and make them silenced. And that the reason why I speak to this is that Medusa very much represents a female archetype to which this happened. And even if she's now in many ways connected to darkness and whatnot, poisonous snakes in the hair, she can also speak to where we are not willing to see the darkness, not to let it overtake us, but to confront the darkness that limits the light within ourselves. So there's a few things that I will advise you to look out for once we experience this transition in this week, which would be rule number 1. Every time we deal with Mars, we have to be careful with anger. We have to be careful with how we handle harsh emotions and difficult emotions, because every time Mars has some certain transitions, there is a higher level of risk for injuries and something coming to surface that we might have suppressed. So my number 1 advice would be for this week to really make sure that you have a practice where you can channel the perhaps rising anger, frustration, ostracization into something that is, either comforting for you, or you go to the gym and you run it out, or you put it into a creative outlet, because this anger, this spark from Mars will most likely stir up either a collective wound, a collective Medusa wound, or especially for the parts of you, because both men and women are half masculine, feminine. Even if you don't want to connect with any gender, this is only speaking about feminine, masculine energies. And the feminine side, whether you're male, female, non-binary, that side can very much show phases of itself this week that we might not even know existed, because it's some sort of like trauma, frustration rising to the surface that needs to be channeled out. So be aware of that, have an outlet for those emotions, whether it's sitting with yourself in meditation, holding yourself, going for a run, going to nature, making something creative of any kind, because then you transmute this energy into something that is actually beneficial for you rather than suppress it, and then it will just have to come up some other time. Another thing I would be looking out for this week would be limited stories about yourself where, you know, maybe something happened to you at one point and it made you think in a certain way, and it made you feel, you know, even if you were the victim in the situation, you have carried on some level of victim mindset ever since, or rage over what happened. I would be very open to confronting that wound and inviting in a new story, so that this energy, this Medusian energy, gets a chance, because this is quite interesting when you think of the Eye of Medusa of Algol, the fixed star. It is in Taurus, which is the sign, you know, a body, earthly sign. So everything about our body, our physical existence, having Mars coming in, transiting, is asking us to alchemize that through our physical being. So, you know, like if you have a scar on your body from an accident, you might still have the scar, but there can be, and you can't heal that, you know, completely. However, there's also a metaphysical wound. There might be an energetic wound that can still be alive. And now with this Mars transit, it's time to say, like, you know what, I'm gonna cut the cord to that. I'm gonna transmute that energy to something else. So also an opportunity for this week. And then I would say finally, and third thing, and that's for the collective in general, look out for, well, you should always do that, but you know, really look out for stories in the media that is misleading you away from yourself, particularly based on women's rights, diverse, the division between masculine, feminine, black and white stories, shaming, naming, guilting, confronting, splitting. Every story that will split the genders, split the non-binary, opposition, men against women, women against men. Be careful with not falling for those kind of stories, especially this week, because when we identify with one side or another, instead of learning that it's all a circle, we are prone to having that discrimination within ourselves as well. So I'm mentioning all of this because I really like to help you dive into the psychology and the understanding of how to use astrology transits as windows in time for us to become particularly aware of certain themes or archetypes or tendencies in this current moment. So that was my little check-in for having Mars conjunct Algol, usually a very feared fixed star, but how we can use it in a positive way and maybe even reinvent the way that we look at Medusa in mythology. So if you like this kind of work, give me a subscribe, like, everything like that would really help my channel to grow, because I have so many messages to bring out to you regards to mythology, astrology, self-learning, evolutionary expansion of your soul. And I would love to hear from you if you can relate to any of this content whatsoever. And if you're curious about what I do in general, you can look at beneath, because I will always list my website, my offers, and what else I'm up to. And I wish you a beautiful week ahead. Bisous.